Welcome to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25 Media. We feature top founders, executives, and business leaders from all over the world.
Chad Franzen here, co-host for this show where we feature top restaurateurs, investors, and business leaders. This is part of our SpotOn series. SpotOn has the best-in-class payment platform for retail, and they have a flagship solution called SpotOn Restaurant, where they combine marketing, software, and payments all in one. They've served everyone from larger chains like Dairy Queen and Subway to small mom-and-pop restaurants. To learn more, go to SpotOn.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. We help B2B businesses to get ROI, clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships through done-for-you podcasts. If you have a B2B business and want to build a great relationship with clients, referral partners, and thought leaders in your space, there's no better way to do it than through podcasts and content marketing. To learn more, go to rise25media.com or email us at support@rise25media.com. Solomon Choi is the founder and CEO of 16 Handles, New York City's first self-serve frozen dessert shop, which he first opened in 2008. He's also the co-founder of Greeno Products, a manufacturer and distributor of environmentally friendly food service disposable packaging. Solomon advises and invests in early-stage companies focused on food and beverage and technology. Solomon, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so 16 Handles has 30 locations in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Florida. Can you describe a typical location for me and what a customer might expect when they go there?
Sure. So a typical location is going to be between 1,200 and 1,600 square feet. You walk in, we have a soft serve wall featuring 16 flavors that have a variety ranging from frozen yogurt, sorbets, vegan soft serve, ice cream, and about 40 to 50 different toppings. And so the customer goes in, selects their cup. It's a self-serve pay-by-weight environment. And we were the pioneers in New York City back in 2008 when I started this business.
Very nice. What had you been doing prior to 2008, prior to 16 Candles?
So prior to 16 Handles, I had a chance to work for a startup hospitality group. We were acquiring as well as opening up our own full-service Japanese restaurants. Prior to that, my father was a multi-unit franchisee, so you can kind of see how my path took me in that direction. He had 3 different Japanese buffet franchise restaurants. And I got to cut my teeth in the industry by running one of his locations down in San Diego, California. That was in a turnaround situation and successfully turned it around and we sold it. And so I decided to continue down that path. And when I joined the startup hospitality group, I wore a ton of different hats. And so I was the opening general manager of one of the restaurants. I did marketing, which is my background. And I eventually became the director of franchise development for a Texas-based gelato franchise that our group purchased the rights for Southern California development. And so got to kind of have my hands in all of those different, areas within food service management and franchising. And that's when I decided to kind of go solo and create my own brand, which has always been a dream of mine. I studied marketing during my university years, and just the power of building a brand, a consumer brand that people can gravitate towards has always been something that I wanted to do.
What kind of gave you the desire to go solo? It's I guess it's kind of easy for some people to just stay where they are rather than start from the ground up and kind of build something of your own.
There were 2 distinct scenarios that created that desire. One was I was in a position where I realized that the founder and CEO of the company also owned the majority of the company. And so it was kind of a lot of the ideas that I had, after a certain point when I realized that, hey, I think that these are good ideas. I'd love to try them. And I realized, well, you don't get to do it just because you want to do it. Even if you're in charge and you're at the restaurant 7 days a week working it, it needs to be yours in order to do that. So I thought that this idea of creating my own brand where I do have complete creative and operational control was something that I really desired. And then secondly, I was responsible for franchising a gelato, brand at a time when the likes of Pinkberry and some of these other pioneers within frozen yogurt, the early to mid 2000s, were really starting to boom. And so I found that a lot of my discovery days and sales calls were met with, hey, so what are you doing about froyo? Everybody wants froyo and frozen yogurt. And I'm like, this is a gelato franchise. It's Italian ice cream. We don't do frozen yogurt. And you say that enough time and you hear that enough times and you realize, I think I'm selling the wrong product here within this category. And so, one of the things within marketing is, you want to be relevant. You want to be, engaging to the guest. And I just felt that there was a whole nother product line that was really resurfacing. And I remember frozen yogurt during the 80s and, when I was growing up, but this time around, I saw it as really more of a lifestyle brand. And even just the shift in behavior. Again, I learned this from working at a Japanese all-you-can-eat buffet to then a higher-end sushi restaurant. People were really looking for, higher quality curation and more, unique experiences as opposed to just value. And so I think even with the shift from, let's say, traditional ice cream and gelato to frozen yogurt because of, fewer calories, maybe some health benefits. Again, there was this desire to really unlock another platform that had been dormant for many years. And I saw that shift. So one of the things that I realized is once I saw that, I could either continue to choose to ignore it and, swim upstream, or, I can kind of ride that wave and then also have the opportunity to break off and start my own brand. And so that's what I decided to do.
Yeah. You started your own brand. You opened your first location in Manhattan's East Village in 2008. Well, I know you'd already had kind of experience starting some places before, but they weren't your own. What were the early days like for your first location at 16 Handles?
So I remember just working 7 days a week. It was nonstop. My first year, when I moved to New York City, this was, I signed a lease in February of 2008. I moved in March of 2008, and I opened up that first location in East Village in July of 2008. And during that time, a lot of things also happened. We were going through, what we look back now and refer to as the Great Recession. Two major investment banks were still in operation, when I had moved to New York, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, rest in peace, both banks. But there was just a lot of uncertainty. And so I remember even some of my friends telling me, they're like, you're moving across country, it snows in New York too, right? You're leaving Southern California where, you have pretty good weather conditions for this type of product. You're going to a market you have no familiarity with. You've never worked there. You've never lived there. And you have the seasonal changes. You don't really have a network there. You don't know anybody. It's much harder to do it there. And Pinkberry also has a major foothold in New York City with frozen yogurt. So why are you doing this? And, if looking back on it now, is very much a David and Goliath moment. I had, at that time, I remember in October of 2007, Howard Schultz's VC firm, Maverick Capital, I think invested $27.5 million, something of that tune, to Pinkberry, specifically for expansion in major markets, and New York City being the first, big market outside of LA. And so here I was going head to head, with not only that, but again, a lot of others that were in the space. And I had a seed investment. I was armed with $600,000 from my family, my parents, my aunt and uncle, and in a checking account. And here I was, I went into the streets of Manhattan, found that first location and decided, I'm still going to go for it. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah. So you had that seed investment and you've grown organically since 2008 with no outside capital or investors. What do you think have been some keys to that success? I mean, considering all those things you were facing when you started.
So a couple of things. One, I was fortunate to have my cousin Alex, who's the CFO of the company. He came on board about a year later, and he came from that finance background. He was working in investment banking and then in private equity. And, in 2009, he was having a bit of a transition, as well as a lot of other, individuals I knew in finance. And he's like, hey, cousin, you need some help. And I said, yes, I'm getting crushed here, but in a good way. And he goes, well, what do you need help with? And I said, for one, I didn't realize I was going to have so much franchise inquiry, right off the bat. I thought, oh, for sure, my first year, I have to just work the store, figure out the marketplace, understand how it works here. And then maybe I can start franchising after that. But I mean, really, we had to line up the door from when I first opened up the doors. And I think in doing so, again, I was working in the business as opposed to being able to work on the business like I do now. And he said, well, you wanted to franchise, right? That's your background. That's what you did before. I said, absolutely. And he's like, so what do you need in order to do that? I was like, you got to do this thing called the franchise disclosure document. We could find a franchise attorney, probably a franchise operating consultant to help write manuals. It's a lot of the stuff I don't like to do, right? And in addition to that, I don't have a clean P&L yet. Back then, it was probably 80% cash business versus credit card. Now that's certainly flipped. But I said, but I know that the business is doing well. It's a healthy business. We're very busy. It's very lucrative. And I think franchising is not going to be very difficult once we can get it set up. But I'm also the general manager of the store, right? And working 7 days a week. So I can't do all this. And so he said, well, let me come help you. I'm going to probably go back into finance after 3 months. He took a sabbatical, well-deserved, after working 5-6 years in an industry where he was working 80 to 100 hours a week. But he came in and helped me set up some good financial practices, helped me clean things up, and ultimately like worked with, our attorney. He goes, look, I'm used to reading these legal documents, and, I've done M&A. And so like, I think in looking at that, I found a family member who I trusted. And granted, we grew up in different coasts. He grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in California. We didn't really see each other that often, but we had a good relationship growing up. And so I think that was what was important. Was one, I had someone who, in a business where 80% of my revenue was cash, somebody who I could trust to help manage that and put systems in place. Secondly, somebody who enjoyed, or at least was a lot more capable of reading through legalese and these documents and working with attorneys and consultants. Because for myself, again, I'm the visionary, I'm the brand builder, and sure, I cut my teeth into the business, working in restaurants and managing them, but really it's about building brand. Like that's really what I wanted to do, and really where my strength lies. And so that's what we were able to do. So a lot of the front of the house, employee, staff management, steps of service. And then he took care of a lot of the back of the house things, like, again, the finance, the accounting, the legal, making sure we're buttoned up. And so really the two of us grew this brand once we decided we were going to go the franchising route, which started in 2010. And, so it was having, like I said, it was having Alex by my side, who, again, was supposed to help me for 3 months. And that turned into, for him, 13 years and me going on to my 14th year in this business. And really also then having the support of family. My aunt and uncle, who still today live in New Jersey, were very helpful very early on. I had no network out here. And so, connecting me with local designers and architects and just people within, their trade network certainly helped. And then even just the support, right? Having family, where even on the holidays or on weekends, if I decided to take it off, I had somewhere to go to get a home cooked meal, and I wasn't alone in this, concrete jungle. And so I think having that emotional support, the family support, the professional support from someone I trust, and then again, just this unrelenting desire to win. My first location in East Village, and this is probably important just to paint the picture, I was walking the 2 data points that I had of New York City that I knew of Manhattan. I didn't even know, for instance, that Manhattan was part of New York. I didn't know how any of this worked. I just knew New York City, the Big Apple, similar to how a lot of people who maybe have only seen it by way of a film or media, but I knew Times Square, right, from a retail perspective. And then I understood Wall Street from the movie. And so with those 2 data points, I was walking day in, day out, meaning like daytime, nighttime, weekend, weekday, just to try to understand New York City as a landscape. It wasn't until one broker finally said, hey, look, you're trying to gather this data, but we have all this. We have all this in our community. I can give you, car traffic. I can give you walk-by traffic. I can give you comps. What is it that you're looking for? And ultimately, like, who is it that you're looking for? And that was really the $1 million question that I wasn't thinking about. So I did this for 2 weeks. In January, I was walking the streets, and it was very cold during that time as well. But it wasn't until he said something that then triggered, my marketing prowess, which is, who's your target demographic? Maybe not in those exact words. And I said, oh, well, I also had the privilege of working for a family friend who still today owns and operates the very first self-serve pay-by-weight frozen dessert shop in Costa Mesa, California. And that's part of the story that I don't think I got into, but I worked for him for free for 3 months to really understand the ins and outs of that business model. So this is not a model that I take credit for that I invented, but I saw it firsthand from the individual who's been doing that since 1990, and got to learn the ins and outs of that business. And it was at that point that I kind of put together my business plan and decided to come out to New York to do that. But yeah, it was really coming out to New York during that time. Again, it was mainly because I said, what I understood, even in a lot of my marketing courses, especially with consumer products, whether it's fashion or even now like financial products, like New York City is the capital of that, and of media and brand. And so, there were so many brands that I grew up with that don't have a New York City location, and so with that, I thought, why don't I just aim for the stars, shoot for the top? I got one shot at this, right? I'm armed with enough money to probably open up one location. And that's exactly what I decided to do. And where I landed, which is on 2nd Avenue between 9th and 10th Street, that location was formerly a Cold Stone Creamery, right? International ice cream business that had only lasted 5 months before closing. And within a 3-block radius, which for Manhattan standards is really nothing, 3 street block radius, There were 9 other frozen dessert competitors, ranging
Wow.
within frozen yogurt, red mango, pink berry. But then you also had, as I mentioned, a former Cold Stone. You had a Ben and Jerry's. So you had a lot of both national and kind of regional and mom and pop stores really sprinkled throughout that market. And I remember even my broker at the time telling me, he was like, "You got to be crazy. Like, why would you want to go there? There are parts of Manhattan where within a 3-block radius, there's 0 ice cream or frozen dessert shops." And I said, "Yeah, but I can't take that risk." Here, after we walked and I observed all of those locations, I said, I just need to beat these 9 other competitors. And if I can do that successfully, then I asked him, I said, don't you think that some people in New York City will say 16 handles is the #1 frozen dessert concept? I mean, surely if I'm in a sea of 9 others and there's 10 of us, and we have the longest lines and people prefer our product, that's probably a bold yet, somewhat truthful statement to make that we are one of the best, if not the best in that area. And that's what I was going for. That was my thesis and my KPI for success. And he's like, but kid, how are you going to do that? Right. And then the truth really came out. And, my broker was a born and raised longtime New Yorker. And so, to see this, California kid come out here with no experience of the city. And, he was just like, look, I want to save you and your parents a lot of headache and money. Like, let's go somewhere else. And I said, absolutely not. It's got to be here. And that store, come June in a few months, will celebrate its 14th birthday.
How many stores did you have before you started franchising, or was that the only location?
So we had that location. Our second location that we opened up in 2009 happened to be in a Westfield Mall property in Paramus, New Jersey, called Garden State Plaza. It's actually a pretty well-known a mall here in the Northeast, one of the highest grossing malls. And so we were presented with an opportunity to build inside that mall in a kiosk location that never existed. So it was like an unused space that was presented to us. And so we opened there. So that obviously was before franchising. But it was really during that 2009 period that Alex and I were focused on getting all of our ducks in a row. That franchising process took 11 months, which is pretty long. It should take about 6. But it took 11 months. And so during that time, while we were operating, these 2 stores, we were certainly learning also that, hey, we also can operate in non-traditional formats. It doesn't need to be in 1,200 square foot, inline space. It can now also be in a mall kiosk. And that then opened up doors to get into stadiums and college campuses. And, so we've had experience doing that. Everything but airports. We still haven't done an airport deal yet.
What made you so confident that you could beat those 9 other competitors when you were first starting out, and those guys were already a little more established than you were anyway?
Sure, a lot more established. I mean, let's get real. You don't need to be nice about it. One, I've always been an eternal optimist, and I feel that as an entrepreneur, it's a quality that needs to come naturally. My view on things is the cup is always half full as opposed to half empty. And in looking at it, I also, relied upon just my skill sets and just my work ethic. I knew that I was willing to outwork any of those, other competitors, but also work smarter, right? And so again, I think that's where my marketing prowess kicked in, where I thought, if I can build this, because as I looked at most, if not all of those brands, none of those were New York City brands, right? Those were all brands that were started somewhere else and then, put a location in New York City. And I thought, the power of the New York City brand, right? Like a Saks Fifth or, something that is reminiscent and really rooted within New York City, I thought has a lot more staying power and shopping power for a consumer than just having a location there. And I thought that origin story where, again, I wasn't a first time operator. I didn't just decide to wake up one day and be like, let me see if I can take on Pinkberry because frozen dessert looks like frozen yogurt looks like a good business. I put in my dues, right? So I think even that, like prior to going there, and this is a part that not many people know, I worked for 3 months for free for a family friend at his mom and pop shop. And so over the years, as others have come to me, and now, as you had mentioned in my intro, I seed invest, I advise a lot of, entrepreneurs who are interested in not just food service, but, consumer packaged goods and food service technology. But the first thing that I always ask people who have this idea is, I'm like, would you be willing to give up your salary and your current career for 3 months to invest in yourself with all the knowledge that will make you a lot more competitive than someone else who maybe has the same idea? And what I've realized 9 out of 10 times is they're actually not willing to do that. So as much as they may have this passion project that's really driving inside of them, and I don't, I don't take that away. Like, I think that a lot of us have these passions, but those who are willing to actually pursue it and sacrifice something to really, kind of put your money where your mouth is, put skin in the game more than just dollars, like literally your time, your most precious asset. That's where I've realized that not all entrepreneurs, or even some entrepreneurs, those who may think they want to be an entrepreneur, but maybe aren't really cut out for it. That's really one of the first things that I look for is, I'm like, how much are you willing to sacrifice to invest into yourself to make you that much more compelling and competitive? And so in looking at that, like, I guess I always kind of put that kind of confidence in myself, just knowing that the only reason I'll lose is if I decide to quit. I was like, I'm not going to lose because it's going to be, being out muscled or out work ethic or outmaneuvered with marketing. Again, I think that's really where I've been able to be successful, is how do you outmaneuver with a very little marketing budget, right? And I've never had the luxury, whether I worked for my father at his restaurant or at this startup, I never had the luxury of having an advertising budget or dollars, right, to be able to spend and buy media at the levels that maybe a lot of larger or more well-established brands have. And so to me, it was always about, I need to stretch this penny and make it work as if it's a dollar, right? And I think that's also where I think the crossroads of when I started in 2008 was really when social media started taking off and businesses were just at the cusp of trying to figure out, hey, how do we attract this audience, right? This younger generation, who, by the way, was my target demographic. It was the millennial consumer, specifically the millennial female. And just understanding that these social channels, which I didn't have as an adult or in college, like, I'm in my 40s, like I graduated past the days of Facebook and all that. And so I had to learn those from my NYU student customer base, but they were eager to teach me because I was willing to learn. And so that's the other thing I would say is, just having that open mind and realizing I don't know everything. And even what I know today in 10 years may not be as relevant. There may be something new. And we're seeing this even within social platforms, right? I mean, I was very early on as a business owner using things like Facebook and Twitter. And we were the first brand in the world to actually use Snapchat, which still today is relevant, but TikTok has certainly taken a lot of its luster. So for me, what I realized is, don't fall in love with a certain platform, but fall in love with following your consumer and where he or she wants to communicate and converse and have commerce. And so I think being committed to that, and I still am today, just as much as I was 14 years ago, I think that's probably one of the reasons why, like I said, without having to reach out to outside investors or raise money, I've been able to organically grow. And again, still use that mentality of stretching that penny, which now isn't a penny. Now it's maybe a couple bucks, but be able to do make the type of influence and impact on my brand that maybe, again, in a traditional setting, I would need hundreds of dollars, and I can do that with maybe tens of dollars.
So you've been franchising for about 11, 12 years now. What makes 16 Handles a good opportunity for a franchisee, and what do you look for in a franchisee?
So I think one of the things that I've realized and come to learn is not everybody, and as a matter of fact, I think I only had one franchisee over the course of the past 12 years or so in franchising that came with a restaurant background, like culinary background. They were actually franchisees of another food franchise. But outside of that, actually, no, there were two, because we actually have one co-branded store where there's a Subway and a 16 Handles under the same roof. So two food service operators, but primarily these were people who were, attorneys, business people, in finance, maybe, someone who wasn't working, maybe like, someone who's the full-time mom and now kids are older and, she wants to run a business. So it's the ease of being able to transition and to teach someone how to have a very similar result. And to me, like that, when it comes to franchising, specifically within food service, that's how I at least look at it from a quadrant standpoint. Is I think the strongest franchises are the ones that are most easily replicable with the highest level of consistency, right? And so in our business where it's self-serve, we're heavily dependent upon not only our product provider, but our equipment, right, to work. Because it's not a skilled position where somebody's necessarily scooping like we did in my previous life with the gelato concept, or making the product within the store. We're really pouring product that is made from a manufacturer. So you can't really get the product wrong unless you're putting it in the wrong machine. Mm-hmm. So it kind of like error proofs a lot of things that otherwise, you would have to rely more on that human element. to get correct. Secondly, speaking of human element, it's a self-serve model, which means it's a lower labor model. And I think that especially today, where a lot of food service operators, because of the pandemic and this great resignation era that we're going through, a lot of those jobs just aren't being filled. People aren't coming back to those. There's a huge gig economy. And so you can make a lot more being a part-time Amazon driver or Uber Eats driver. And so I think because people have a lot more choices, this idea of going back and working in, let's say, a traditional minimum wage setting, where, let's keep it real, like those jobs aren't easy, right? They're hard. For our business, we don't do any kind of cooking. So I think for a landlord, that's a benefit. We don't need any ventilation. There's there's not gonna be a fire because of cooking. And then also for employees, the risk of being injured on the job is also a lot less because we're not really dealing with that type of environment. And it's fewer employees that are needed. And so specifically for an owner operator, this is a great opportunity because the startup cost of opening up a 16 handles is a fraction of what it would be for, let's say, a big burger chain or a pizza chain. Secondly, it's much easier to operate because you need fewer people to do it. And it's not that we don't do training. I mean, we still have our own training, but you don't need to go to, let's say, a hamburger university for 6 months to learn how to do this. And because there is a seasonality factor incorporated into the business, that actually also helps even with the labor management. So our stores can be operated with as few as one individual, which during the winters, that's typically the case. You'll have one opener. And even in the summer and the busiest of times when we're having people take in shipments that are coming in of product, 4 or 5 people. So to be able to do that and to have an operation that can generate $1 million plus a year, which our best locations do, with a staff of that's on shift from 1 to 5 employees, that metric doesn't really exist in the food service world. And so I think for one, when looking at it like that, that's a key competitive advantage. Low build out cost, low labor, and yet still be able to fluctuate with a lot of part-time labor. And that's the other thing too, is I think because our labor pool typically skews young, again, we have a lot of minimum wage first-time job employees. Mm-hmm. It's a fun environment for them, right? Like they're out there with the guests more often than being, in the back doing some menial tasks. And it's a fun environment. I mean, who doesn't love, frozen dessert and soft serve? It's like a happy environment. And the people coming in are coming in because they choose to, indulge, not because they have to eat, let's say, lunch or dinner. So I think from that standpoint too, it's just, we deal with much happier customers
Sure.
and who are less in a rush, right? And so I think those things are all positive. And the other thing that was really instrumental for our business as well, and again, I credit this to being in New York City, is we were one of the first, at least in the frozen dessert space, to have to be on all the delivery platforms that most consumers are now privy to because of what had to happen during the pandemic when most restaurants were actually shut down. We've been doing delivery for 8 years. So we've mastered how to deliver soft serve without melting for 8 years. Like this isn't, we learned it in the past 2 because of the pandemic. And as a result of that, we've invested into our technology stack, our mobile app, where you can order directly from our website or our app, or you can go on to your favorite third-party delivery provider. We're on there. And the convenience, which I think the convenience is key for a customer, is there. So if you don't want to come into the store, and if you really think about it, Chad, like during the pandemic, this is a self-serve environment where people are touching things. I mean, that was taboo. I had some franchisees in April of 2020 think that our business model was dead and was never going to be able to come back from this, just because it was in a very heightened state. The epicenter of COVID-19 in the US was in New Rochelle, New York, where we have a location. And so certainly those things made us think differently and pivot. But we're still here, we're still kind of thriving in the sense that we have had our biggest product partnership ever in the brand's history. And that was a conversation that was had by myself and the president of Oatly, who you may have heard of. They went public last year. Mm-hmm. And we developed, a 16 handles and an Oatly proprietary soft serve line within our stores. And so why I did that was really, my interest, like I said, of just really following the consumer and consumer behavior and consumer patterns and the shifting taste of consumers. And, for a long time, we had those that were looking for maybe more vegan options or plant-based options as it's really become more popular now. And we weren't addressing that in a meaningful way. We've always had non-dairy sorbets. So technically, I've always had a vegan or a non-dairy option. But are more exciting flavors. We're not always just fruit sorbets. And so, it was really a commitment to that. It's, hey, if we're this inclusive brand that's really a one-stop shop, frozen dessert shop for all people of all dietary celebrations, as we like to call it, not just restrictions, but celebrations, then we really need to stay committed to that from a product standpoint. So I think that evolution, which really started about 4 years ago, but we really kind of like planted that flag, last year with our partnership with Oatly, which is continuing all of this year as well, is we are now an omni-channel platform because of our operational ability to deliver the product within 30 minutes or so. Like if you go to 16handles.com and you order, a soft serve, you'll probably get it within 30 minutes, right, on average. So you have that capability, which even a grocery store doesn't offer you that. Secondly, our business promotes and actually encourages discovery, trial, sampling, right? And so this is something that our customers come in expecting as part of the experience. And so I say all this because you had mentioned, like, what makes this a great opportunity now? I think more so than ever, this addresses a lot of the pain points that I see in the food service industry now, which is still expensive build outs, right? I mean, people are talking about, oh, well, maybe we can just convert everything to ghost kitchens, which I think it can be a part of your strategy, but if you're a cloud or a ghost kitchen in an industrial part of town that people aren't driving by or looking at, like, then what advertising are you going to have? Like, I think that's very difficult to build a brand like that. I think if you're already a well-established brand, then you can certainly address pockets around the country where that makes sense. But to create a brand, I mean, part of what makes sense in terms of getting these locations, especially in these busy streets of New York City, is these are ongoing billboards that people walk by, live above, work next to. And so like that constant engagement of impressions. And then when the weather warms up, again, this like knee-jerk reaction to, I want something cold and satisfying, there's that. And then being able to now be a place where other brands can collaborate and create another product platform that they don't have, right? So we love working with brands that aren't in, let's say, the ice cream or the soft serve space. Why? Because this gives a form factor that's unique. And especially during the summer months and the warmer months where we're very relevant, it's a great marketing partnership for us because it creates, again, brand awareness and affinity for their product, which may lose some of that, to companies like ours, which are very, relevant during that time. And so I think that it's those factors, and I know I kind of went all over the place, but they're probably those 4 or 5 different factors that make 16 Handles an attractive business. And it's also something that's easily scalable. And so unlike, some other food service franchise options where, again, the cost of build out is very expensive. The cost of human capital is very expensive. Without naming names, like I know certain burger franchises, you can't open unless you have 30 to 40 people on payroll, right? And that they've gone through training, and so I myself realized this my first summer in 2008 when I opened up my store in East Village, and my 2 opening staff, one was a cashier, one was supposed to do fruit prep. They both called, one of them called out, one of them was a no-call, no-show. And this happens in the industry, right? You find out that they're not showing up because they don't show up and they don't call you. But I was there, and while it was challenging for me, I got the store up and running. I was able to open up. And by the time my cashier came, and the one who did call, she was, stuck on a subway, which is also something that happens. But by the time she came in, which was an hour and a half after she was supposed to be there, I had already rung up $100 and was in operation. How many restaurants can do that? You can't. Most retailers can't even do that. And so that's when I realized that this business, while it is food service and while it is seasonal and while it has, some of these other things where it's a luxury, you don't have to eat, soft serve or frozen dessert, like most people have to eat lunch or dinner. But again, if you make it very desirable, you make it very relevant and engaging, it's not something that, needs to close down during the winter. Like people still consume frozen dessert. And being here in the Northeast, I mean, there's actually statistics that show that those in New England consume more ice cream per capita than anywhere else in the world, and it doesn't fall off during the winter. And so, there is, I think, a good product fit for people's natural consumption behavior, but being best in class and being a relevant brand, that much, is not guaranteed. That needs to be earned. And I think like that's what keeps us going.
I have one more question for you, but first, how can people find out more about potentially becoming a franchisee and just about 16 Handles in general as a customer? How can people find out more?
So all of our social channels, it's the number 16 Handles with an S. 16handles.com. You can find all of our information there. And I would also say, I look forward to Q2 where we're actually going through a rebrand right now as well. So that's really exciting. So taking everything that we've learned and everything we've learned even during the last 2 years of the pandemic, and we're working with a world-class agency that works with some of the largest food franchises, and we will have the new and improved version of what 16 Handles will be. And I think that will also attract a lot of new franchise interest because, again, we're a brand that continues to evolve and we won't stop. And I think that the last 14 years and a great recession and now a pandemic have proven that this is a pretty good business to be in if we can weather those storms, all being privately funded.
Sure. I have one more question for you. As you mentioned, it's an ever-evolving process, but last time I checked, you had 87 flavors. They included peanut butter perfection, American apple pie, banana pudding, chocolicious, peach sangria, sorbetto, and oatly chai tea. How do you guys come up with all these flavors, and do you have a favorite?
So our flavor development is an ongoing process. It's one of the most favorite parts of my job. We work with some great co-packers and manufacturers, and I get to be literally like that kid in the candy store every year. One of our co-packers in Michigan, I go out there and for 3-4 days, and again, this sounds a lot better than it really is, but if you're eating just soft serve for 3-4 days straight for six hours a day, trust me, your taste buds want something like salty and crunchy. But I do that to help, again, develop our flavors. And so every single flavor that's come into 16 Handles, I personally would have to sign off on, and I'm very much involved in that process. And even with the Oatly team, I'm working with their head of development for frozen, and we work in tandem in person to sign up on these flavors together. And so I think, again, it's a commitment to that type of R&D in the product process that I think also has us stand out. My favorite. That's always a funny question that I get. I would say one of my favorites is our So Fresh Mango Sorbetto. It uses these Alfonso mangoes, which are some of the sweetest mangoes in the world that come from India. And so it uses the Alfonso mango puree. And on a visit to India, I actually got to try that mango. And I was like, I've never had a mango that tasted like this. I need this flavor in the handles. And so that's one of my favorites. And then if I'm, it depends on the mood. And that's what I think is the beauty of 16 Handles is, if I'm in the mood for maybe something lighter and I want to be healthier, and I'll go for like our Euro tart. If I want something more indulgent, I love our salted caramel when I have my sweet tooth days. And so there's kind of something for everybody, and depending on the mood, and the mood can change. I think Mondays feels very different than Friday night when I'm done with the week, right? And so I want to be able to celebrate however I want to. I think that's the beauty of it too, is the way I want to do it, how much, how little, with toppings, without. There's no judgment and there's no right or wrong. It's literally whatever you feel like is the right answer. And so I think people have come accustomed to that, where it's not like, hey, you have to buy this small and it costs this much. You get to determine what that is. And, we're in a position today where customization, personalization, and experience, people are craving that, right? And so I think that's where we're head and shoulders above a lot of our peers in the frozen dessert space, just because it's also not easy to get this level of variety of soft serve outside of the 16 Handles. You can get here in the Northeast a Mr. Softy truck for 3 months out of the year, but you have chocolate and vanilla, or you can go to McDonald's, and if they do happen to have a working soft serve machine, again, it's just that vanilla. So I think there's this FOMO aspect of, if I want soft serve, it's not at my house. Most homes I know don't have a soft serve machine. Most schools and most businesses don't. So certainly grocery store. So again, I think there's this niche that we're filling. That I think we've been very successful at.
Hey, Solomon, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been great hearing your story. Congratulations on all of your success, and best wishes moving forward. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Top Business Leaders Show, powered by Rise 25. Visit rise25.com to check out more episodes of the show and to learn more about how you can start your own podcast.